What's up, guys? So today is the 31st of July 2017, and this is actually my second draft. I had a feeling, and I even called it in the beginning of that first draft, that I was likely going to redo this video. And I didn't actually think it was because I was going to come onto an epiphany like this, or at least on a conscious level I didn't know that. Definitely my psychic signature kicked in at some point or another. So, 30 plus minutes in, listening to myself meander as I was working on some jewelry items. Essentially, I kept just randomly emphasizing on the layout for the actual eclipse chart. I'm talking about the solar eclipse that will be happening on the 21st of August, 2017 on Monday. It has the time frame for 2:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I calculated it for Portland, Oregon, because just from the latitude, longitude kind of geographical range, it still constitutes for my area, and for also it shouldn't really be letting me automatically calculate it in per se the location, because solar eclipses are actually localized to particular areas. So just to give you kind of a history about the recent solar eclipse in at least the last few years or so, just to give you an idea of what an actual eclipse means. So a lot of modern astrologers like to discourage the traditional medieval associations with omens and malefic associations with eclipses. I, of course, being the devil's advocate, being abnormal, and being prone to favor malefic and medieval associations, and I vocalize it. I know Robert Hahn is his forte is medieval, but he doesn't actually perpetuate that into predicting transit events, because essentially people don't like that. That's not the whole New Age Neptune and Pisces kind of hippie thing. So, just a brief history with the malefic signatures with eclipses. 3.5 to 4 years ago, we had a solar eclipse that went over part of Russia, throughout Japan, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. The events that then transpired over the next, year to 18 plus months were catastrophic earthquakes, instability structures environmentally, there being invasions with Muslim migrants, and there being feuds with Muslim migrants, and even, attacks on civilians. Like, I always think instantly that one event that is that I correlate with the actual eclipse kind of sociological trends. The Russian nanny that's a Muslim decapitating the child that she's watching, and then walking around and parading the head like it's, some sort of Coach purse or something like that, and her being so proud of that. And then the end of that eclipse actually was the main catastrophic event that happened was the huge magnitude earthquake that happened on the coast of Japan that destabilized the structure of the Fukushima radioactive plant. The next following eclipse that started right after that one pretty much picked up where they left off. That's the way that the solar eclipses work with their localized locations. It started off the coast of Japan and went all the way across the Ring of Fire in the Pacific Ocean and stopped about 200 miles or so off the coast of the United States on the west coast. So what did that constitute as? That constituted, obviously, not much sociological stuff going on throughout the Pacific Ocean, but any kind of malefic omens or toxic effects that would be associated with the ocean would obviously, there's the butterfly effect, the synchronistic kind of themes. Past, present, and future, they all have correlating things. So the destabilization of the Fukushima plant in Japan, them deciding to try to hide it from the public and not ask for potential international aid if there was even some sort of way to contain it, and so them trying to keep it under wraps, either because they didn't want to take the blame, they didn't want to publicize and then have other countries potentially throw it in their face of what is going on, and or they just want to pretend like it wasn't actually happening. Whatever their motives were, they decided to pretend it wasn't happening and continue to let it transpire. So now, as we're approaching, obviously, the end of that eclipse duration that went over the Pacific Ocean, we are now going to be dealing with the ramifications and the catastrophic or malefic effects of people who were unaware of the Saturn-Neptune square, aka the radioactive ocean now. People who like to go swimming on the beach, that live on the west coast, people who are huge fans of seafood, people who live on islands in that general. It's to the point now with like just the way that the current directions flow with the ocean, at least from, kind of diagrams referencing, that the radioactive contaminants to at least a harmful toxic level, if not lethal, are pretty much even Steven everywhere and have at least touched every body of water in every ocean. So it's actually gone all the way around, and it's infected the Atlantic as well as the Indian Ocean too, definitely so. But anyway, then we speed forward to the eclipse that's going to be happening. It'll pick up right where that last one left off, right off the coast of the United States. So the Ring of Fire is the tectonic plate that goes around Japan, set off first with that original eclipse from years prior. And it goes by Papua New Guinea, Australia, goes all the way down to the southern Arctic area, and then up the Cape of like Chile, and then all the way up Mexico, the San Andreas Fault, and to the Cascade Fault into Canada. So the only places that haven't really been shook by any kind of really intense catastrophic quake that would be causing a slip or some sort of the last bit of the plate that needs to shake loose for it to slip would be the San Andreas Fault and the Cascade Fault, so the west coast of the United States, which coincidentally that's where this eclipse will be picking up at. So that being said, Uranus-Pluto square is a continuing generational transit that will still continue to have themes on a sociological, mental, spiritual, and environmental level for the next 10 years or so. So, inevitably, there will be some sort of catastrophic event that will transpire for sure, with the fault line along the west coast of the United States. Regardless if that's the major cataclysmic event that I've actually been kind of anxious about, I'm not entirely sure. But that's definitely the one that's on the top of the list. Then we think about the potential sociological environments with this. The way I kind of piece this together. So the layout of the chart at this moment, we have the eclipse at 0 degrees for the moon in Virgo and 29 degrees in Leo in the sun. The sun is on the opposite side in the 9th house of the MC, and then the moon is in the 10th house. It's in a stellium with trans-Pluto, which has to do with obviously Pluto, and Pluto having to do with security and resources of others, and it being obviously a deflecting of energy from Pluto's aspects. Then we have Vulcan conjunct with it, and Mercury, and Vesta, and the MC. So obviously, Mercurial or 6th house, because it's Virgo, related themes are going to be the prime, cataclysmic event or omen, more or less. And it being in opposition with the South Node and the Earth symbol in the 3rd house would be, the 3rd house can translate to communications or the way that the community structure is based, and it's going to be something to do with work and service, or like the daily habitual behavior, or the kind of mundane routines that have fed into the self-undoing, abusive kind of scenarios. In the 1st house, we have Black Moon Lilith conjunct with Saturn. Saturn has to do with authority. Black Moon Lilith obviously is the shadow projection of that. Can have to do with abusing power, knowledge, and then also, I always forget this too, Jupiter has to do with abundance, good fortune, and wealth, right? So that was one thing that didn't really dawn on me per se at that moment. Saturn is also retrograde during this eclipse at this moment, and it is also square with the trans-Pluto, Vulcan, and the Moon. So that would entail that the emotional investment to try to strategize or be frugal with the collective kind of resources and effort, because that would be the 10th house of the community at large, or the government, or the federal, actually. It would be the federal government, or the Pluto and Capricorn or Saturn kind of affiliates, feeling frugal and stingy, trying to figure out ways to potentially stop the bleeding, cauterize the wound, with what I translate to be Pluto and Juno and Hygeia in a stellium in the second house, which is the Venus house associated with emotional self-worth and resources and your available self-resources, in opposition with Ceres and Venus in the 8th house of others' resources, and it forming squares with Jupiter and Libra in the 11th house of sociological institutions, organizations, and also that's a trauma signature. So since these are, Jupiter again can be associated with economy or wealth as well, and there being a balance of wealth in particular. So as I was meandering and kind of going on and on about things, the thing that I blurted out was there's going to be some sort of compromise or deterioration or just complete annihilation of Social Security. Since, honestly, Pluto, when it's on its south node in Capricorn, and then it will be conjunct with Jupiter in Capricorn and Saturn in Capricorn, that'll be in 2019, I believe, when all those will eventually be aligned. That, I know Philip Sedgwick has kind of mumbled about it might be something to do with Social Security or finances. I didn't even think of that until I was kind of just elaborating on this. But just with all the random associated words that I kept blurting out about security, resources, money, and just economy specifically being associated with this. And then also we have Neptune in the 4th house with the IC and Chiron. So Chiron's actually at 27 degrees of Pisces at this moment, retrograde, so retrograde will be reflecting or be delayed. And the 27th degree is right on the, it's not obviously aligned with the galactic center, because that's on the polarity crux of Sagittarius and Gemini, but it will be squaring it. So there will be some sort of deflected, kind of, not gloom and doom, but just like dread that people will likely be feeling, or just feeling insecure and unsure of their stability and their equity and their financial, self-sufficiency in general. So the 4th house has to do with undoing. So Neptune can obviously, and especially with Chiron right there, can translate to contagious disease, some sort of destabilization, even flooding of home communities. But directly in this example that I'm kind of leading up to would be more of a sociological or mundane, directly to do with people having a loss or not understanding what kind of equity they have, anything that they've invested into Social Security. And that's another thing as well. Jupiter, the sign for Jupiter, which is Sagittarius, being in the sign for Black Moon Lilith. Black Moon Lilith again has to do with dividing people on ideologies and information and power. So the one thing that has been a significant divide that the gap keeps widening is the younger generations, the millennials, not understanding the concept of inflation, not understanding the origins and the efficiency of how the actual economy worked, how the safety nets for Social Security and social services actually were established, and what are the checks and balances with that, especially with them pushing for, healthcare and all that. Obama was well aware of what all that did, and he doesn't give a fuck about that. Hence why he made sure to give himself a really hefty raise that comes right out of the taxpayers' funds that will be definitely secured, I'm sure, with the whole moon being in Virgo and them being frugal and stingy, to basically cut wherever they have to and or sabotage maybe the finances or the investments of the people of the United States that are justified and have rightfully earned anything that they paid into Social Security, that are now going to lose it all, so the people at the top can still continue to ride the wave of their Federal Reserve notes that are worth nothing. And again, this is perpetuated information that's been well known to the powers that be, Pluto and Capricorn, so any kind of monopolization, government sources, banks, that sort of thing. would already be well aware of all of this. And again, Venus being associated with the second house of self-resources, and it being in the 8th house of secrets, and also the remedy or the potential way to rectify some of these issues would also be hidden in the 8th or the 12th house of secrets. So Ceres in Cancer, being in the quadrant of Pluto, would be directly involved with the hiding of the potential remedy or treatment to rectify this issue that is continuing to spiral out of control, and being well known to the actual Pluto and Capricorn associated sociological institutions. So, first and foremost, this eclipse is actually going to be the beginning of the end of the social services and the way that the infrastructure for the U.S. economy is going. It makes total sense because right about that time, when those 3 planets will be in Capricorn in a stellium, that will signify right around the time. I think it'll be probably a little bit later, but obviously generational aspects and just transit ingresses are always delayed, just like the seasons. When Uranus will go into Taurus, so there would be some sort of trauma signature associated with stability, the economy, and the resources, individual resources. So that coincides with that. That would also make sense why I was kind of talking about this with Boo. I did predict that Trump was going to win the election, and he also, if you actually did your homework and paid attention to anything and not just paid attention to what the news tells you to think, Trump's actually been heavily involved in politics for over 40 years. Wait, 40 years now. Because in the 80s, there's videos of him in the 80s, like, endorsing, like, the first Bush and everything. And thinking that Reagan was really cool. And he emulates Reagan a lot. And one thing for sure, Reagan was an Aquarius. And he was also one of the other presidents that's at least known to the public vaguely that he's had some sort of astrological insight. We're well aware that JP Morgan and people that are on the New York Stock Exchange, and as JP Morgan quotes himself, only billionaires consult astrologers, not millionaires. Trump definitely, especially with the way that everything just seems to go in sync with him, or that he happened to choose the right election cycle to run for president, everything just went smoothly for him, and he already actually kind of knew how the results were going to go before it even transpired. That would be because he consulted an astrologer, just as I predicted that he was going to win that as well. So not only did he come in an opportune time that he would potentially win, because of the sociological destabilization and lack of faith in the actual powers that be in the government bodies to do their job, but because he is known, because everybody emphasizes on how he is known for having bankruptcies, and he just makes money out of nowhere. He does applaud himself with that. He does have, if I'm correct, Neptune conjunct with Jupiter. So what that can signify is that could be an over-exaggerated abundance of fortune and good luck and wealth, or depending on malefic signatures that would be aspecting that, it could cause complete and utter financial ruin. And yeah, any ruin of any abundance of anything. And so him going through bankruptcies and then, having, successes and failures with different kind of entrepreneurship and businesses and stuff throughout his life. And he has his sun and his moon in opposition, so it's like a full moon kind of thing. That's definitely a personality conflict to the fullest extent. His sun being conjunct with Uranus just reemphasizes that as well. So he definitely understands the chaotic signature and trauma signatures, and more importantly, he would understand the flows, the synchronistic flows of trauma signatures that would be directly associated to financial associations, mundane economic stuff, and economies. So he knew fully well that he was going to win this election, and he knew fully well that he was the one that was actually going to be able to fix this. He is notorious for, if you have read The Art of the Deal, reference that, or have even seen some of his interviews about what he's talked about, projects he's done. He's notorious. He hates picking up where people have left off. He likes to just completely clean the slate off and demolish everything and start from scratch. He's obviously been trying to do that as he's been in office throughout this first term. And he's been struggling, fighting with everybody that's part of the branches of government that don't want anything to change all the way. He probably knew that he was going to continue to have these kind of issues. He does have signatures in his chart similar to mine that makes him combative and not very cooperative with other people, and or people just don't like him in general for whatever reason. And so the best way for him to actually get his way with a clean slate is to just come in when everything is about to completely destabilize and crumble, and just because there will be no remnants left of what the structure that was, hence Uranus-Pluto square, and then also Neptune squaring Saturn, as those generational effects will still have residual influences sociologically, he will eventually have his clean slate to work with. But be warned now, there will obviously be some sort of very, very significant, distinct difference or system that will be integrated now. This being the end of the Uranus and Aries transit. Last time that Uranus was in Aries was when we had the Great Depression and the New York Stock Exchange crash. And so Teddy Roosevelt actually came in and he created the social services and everything like that, which Trump does. He does have signatures where he cares about his community, and despite the fact that his air sun and his fiery moon makes it look like he's not necessarily very empathetic or emotional, he definitely does care about the inner communities and wants them to be self-sufficient and strong, the way they were before the Great Depression happened, and the way they were before the safety net was created, where all the communities were self-sufficient. A lot of the infrastructures like school, education, any kind of community services or charities were all community and local supervised and run. Gives the federal kind of level less to do, less to mingle in with, and potentially just try to one size fits all kind of thing, and then thereby shortchanging the local areas that are in need of things and not be able to get the help they need. Because that's where this all domino effect started. You put somebody at the top of the table, but they don't even actually know that the air conditioner is on full blast at the very end of the table, and the people down there are freezing their asses off. And that person up at the very front controls the thermostat. It doesn't make any sense. Don't do that. Yeah. You delegate to local areas. If it's beyond something that affects you, you shouldn't be able to have any of your hands in it or tamper with it at all. So this eclipse, first and foremost, beyond the fact that I can see some sort of contagious potential pandemic happening that could actually be metaphorically associated with the healthcare system too, and there being some sort of continuing destabilization mentally for people, even to the point of maybe there being blue royale and complete anarchy, or what I would call the non-Hollywood version of the zombie apocalypse, and people going into psychosis. If you've ever been to a psychiatric ward, if you've ever seen one, I've had the displeasure of actually being in one for over 2 weeks. Granted, I probably could have got out quicker if I was a little bit more cooperative, but that was my bad. And after a while, making sure that nobody could actually bug me from the outside, and I couldn't get any phone calls, couldn't be disturbed. I had art class, and I got to go swimming, and people made my food and stuff. Like, I started to actually enjoy it. Except for when I started to provoke the schizophrenic chick that went totally psycho and said that the voices in her head were telling her to stab me with a fork. Then she got her forks taken away permanently from the cafeteria. She was not the only one that was kind of crazy like that. And oddly enough, it was about almost 10 years ago when that actual event happened, when I had that experience. And I'm having some very, very vivid traumatizing flashbacks sometimes. Not because I'm seeing people that looked like them, but because I'm seeing people emulate similar behavior that's actually starting to escalate. And that's actually where I get a lot of my instant kind of translations with people losing their mind and the psychosis and the cognitive dissonance and psychoticness, is I saw it firsthand. People usually don't stay in psychiatric lockdown for the extensive period of time that I was. Problem is that they were trying to prove that I was, basically I was clinically diagnosed with psychopathy, and I was sitting there intentionally fucking with the psychotherapists, and the nurses that would obviously trade off shifts, and completely acting differently and compromising any of their consistent observational notes. And it was really screwing them up. Yeah, I was totally mind-fucking all the people that were trying to observe me in the lockdown. And that's essentially why I stayed there so long. So I got to see, like groups of people being admitted and being released, and then more people being admitted and released. So I got to see a couple of different Brady Bunch size collective groups of people that were being put in high high security lockdown for psychiatric evaluation. What?
Quarantine?
No, high risk.
Okay.
The ones that are dangerous that you...
Yeah. That's MU board, I believe.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about when I was in the psychiatric. I'm comparing everybody else that I see, like, in the general public, like, walking down the street, to, like, the crazy psychiatric people I was stuck in the psych ward with.
Mental instability is the hip new thing. It's trendy.
Yeah. So that's the general gist of that, and at least this is shorter than my random video that I, apparently from the moment I started it, realized that it was a draft. But, so... the immediate kind of event that will transpire as soon as this eclipse is going off is there's going to be a continuation of people, aka the millennials, the social justice warriors, and the people that are mentally deranged, continuing to perpetuate almost to the point of force by riots and, protesting and causing all kinds of shit. That would be like, what do you guys call them?
Antifa? Yeah,
Antifa?
They're going to try and probably do some shit at the rally coming up around the same time, but they're going to get their heads all stomped in.
Well, no, I'm not talking about like on a microcosmic level. I'm talking about them continuing to perpetuate the whole raising minimum wage, creating more social whatever, that sort of thing. That's going to continue to create this huge gap between those who actually have invested into social services and social security that rightfully are justified to the money they put into it, and the people that are actually trying to dip into it now, and or that they're taking money from that without actually knowing it, meaning because the government congressmen are actually, when they do the budgets all the time, they decide where they're going to cut where they're going to cut this, and they've been continually giving themselves raises, of course, naturally. We already know that that's why they go through all this trouble to sit there in that fucking room and squabble with each other all day.
Install a guillotine at Capitol Hill.
Okay, boo. Don't distract me. And they're continuing to dip into the Social Security and any other things that they can do. And I know that Trump is trying to do the best he can to rectify that or stop them from doing that, but that's the whole checks and balances thing, and the entire structure of how to keep it from being completely corrupted hasn't been entirely demolished, so he's obviously having some conflict with that. But that's the general gist. So the perpetuating of instead of cauterizing the wound, it's just gonna, the millennials are just feeding into the fire and trying and making it profusely bleed without realizing that they're gonna bleed out, and that's gonna cause some issues. And that will be the instantaneous thing. Also, the other instantaneous thing could be, more earthquakes. They've been, kind of building up. I would honestly think once Pluto goes direct, which will be about a month after this, is when there will be either an intense in magnitude or perhaps catastrophic levels of earthquakes going on the West Coast, and they will, as I would speculate, actually start to progress towards the East Coast. And yeah, so anywhere where there's potential fault lines, risks, if you've been seeing the news, especially since Neptune's been retrograde, Pluto's retrograde, and Saturn's retrograde as well, and they love to distract people with different stuff, that instead of them doing like the noble thing, or the more emotionally healthy thing, is to not scare the fuck out of people. They're going to actually go about the opposite of that, and they're going to scare the fuck out of you with things. But since they've been causing the cognitive dissonance and giving you so much mixed information and references, you don't even know what is what anymore, and people probably aren't even paying attention. So this is actually the ample time for all news sources or anything like that to actually just start coming out and blatantly telling people about catastrophic events that are estimated to transpire soon. Because at this point, everybody's tuned out the news in general, and or they think half of it's fake, or whatever else. So now this is the time where like the ship's going down. The ship is going down. The basically the deckmen on the Titanic started screaming that everywhere. Once everybody's already like screaming and running around, and half of the entire under part of the ship is already drowning, and then you start yelling, "Oh, the ship's going down!" Well, yes, okay. I'm pretty sure we're beyond listening to you, and that's the news right now. So, some people specifically have been asking me about the Cascade Fault, Seattle Fault Line, and yet again, even 3 years ago, it was in 2015, me and Boo actually went to the Seattle Underground thing, because I really wanted to go for the whole haunted tour thing and see the old crumbling structures and stuff. And even at that moment, before I started getting really hardcore into predicting transit events, and before I was either aware of my psychic mojo, or it developed, or whatever the case may be, I did mention too that the karmatic kind of vibe that I was getting from that down there, that Saturn won't actually let Seattle get away with what they did, and that Seattle's going to have some karmatic repercussions for doing what they did, aka just shortcuts with the plumbing kind of thing and the rising of the tides. And then the people who decided to continue installing plumbing anyway, that were the richy rich, that were on the top, the more expensive infrastructures that weren't in the immediate like city area, who continue to live and have their luxuries with their plumbing, and then spread knowingly the bubonic plague all over the streets of Seattle and killed the majority of the town. So, by the way, synchronistic kind of things, those kind of sociological events will also transpire soon within the next few years or so, because that's a Neptune Pisces thing. So, it's just going to, step on the necks of those beneath you and go all the way to the top, just like Tom Scher says. And
speaking of Tom Scher, doesn't he live in that area?
Yeah, he does. That's his problem.
That's funny.
And he lives in West Seattle too, so he's even closer to the edge. Yep, dude, you should listen to your own music and think about the projection. But anyway, maybe he'll be traveling then. Nah.
Is he touring? Maybe he's touring.
Knowing him, he probably won't be touring anywhere far enough. But anyway, that'll be the trend again. I mean, it's nothing new. The powerful will, oppress the less powerful, etc., etc. Don't need a history lesson. Synchronicity is the thing. That's the gist of it. So this eclipse, again, expect catastrophic earthquakes, and let's hope we can keep volcano activity out of this one, and continuation of very violent weather in general, just with the fluctuation of the hemispheres, how they're naturally supposed to have heat and cool air in certain regions. It's going to continue to go topsy-turvy, making violent weather. As a result, maybe that'll actually fluctuate the magma kind of things and underneath the tectonic plates, and not actually, it'll probably, actually, now that I think about it, Uranus-Pluto square being abnormal, it would actually probably create some sort of crack in the tectonic plate somewhere, and create a massive explosive volcano somewhere where there's never been one.
Yeah, it'd have to be a pretty impressive earthquake to do so.
Well, I don't think there's any other potential, like, astrological alignment or aspect that I could make this any more catastrophic than the ones that are going on. Hence Revelations. Woo! Eclipses are still omens, because even though when I initially did my first eclipse kind of interpretation, and I did get some commentary from fellow colleagues, astrologers or whatever, saying that I'm perpetuating fear and that the malefic thing is not the way that we translate stuff anymore, and blah, blah, blah. We'll go tell that to Japan and the ocean and the fish, and yeah. You can tell that to Seattle probably next year.
Came across the waves, fled from a land at war. Oh, hello, is there someone there who cares for God-forsaken souls and God-forsaken man? Is there someone there who cares?